Hey, everyone. On this week's Trade of Black podcast, we talk about how Chuck Schumer, he's been speaking with a number of senators about reshaping a cannabis bill. Also, big news out of the state of Pennsylvania about how it could be the next state to legalize recreational cannabis, which would be huge. And finally, cannabis stocks, volume way up this week. Why? Find out now in our latest podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Trade to Black podcast. We are a division of the Dales Media Group. I'm your host, Shad Dales. And before we get into this week's podcast, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by us or our guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Joining me as usual, lead financial writer Benjamin Smith, who's got his Bengals orange t-shirt on. How was the week, brother?
Yeah, the week was good. Tons of news in the cannabis industry, even some in the psychedelics industry. We had Super Bowl 56 coming up. I'm wearing my orange. So, yeah, all right. It's going to be a good weekend.
And don't look now, Ben, but we got somebody on who's a little bit smarter than you and I. He is the Director of Investor Relations from Jushi, Todd Green. What's going on, Mr. Green?
Hey, Shad, everything's good. Before you hit me up to join this, I was thinking about the first time we met. If you recall,
I know
it was MJ Biz.
It was
like 2019, and we bumped into each other on the floor. And we just recently did Virginia, and it's crazy to see.
Isn't that?
Like, we maybe had 10 stores open. We're almost triple that now. Things are super exciting over at Jushi. Thank you for having me.
I went, and I appreciate you coming on. I went to see my broker at Canaccord in Toronto. I don't know how many years ago. And the guy next to me, Brian Cady, who's a big believer, obviously, in Jushi, told me a little bit about this story. So I felt, obviously, loved the story, the company, walking around MJ Biz. And then all of a sudden, there you were, saw the stand. And you know what? That was a good time. But obviously, life's changed a little bit since back in prior to COVID, to say the least, right?
Definitely.
Well, I want to both have you on. I want to begin with the news from Washington, where Chuck Schumer this week invited senators to help reshape a cannabis bill. He sent a letter to colleagues for them to get involved in the process of drafting a federal marijuana legalization bill that they plan to file in the weeks ahead. So, Todd, if I'm an investor in this space, what's the biggest takeaway off of this announcement? Should we read much into it?
So the Schumer bill, I'm not sure. So you can kind of couple this with safe banking that was now, I think, introduced for the 6th or 7th time into the House. So what it's coming down to, in my personal opinion, is we're finally starting to see strong momentum, bipartisan to a degree. But that's the real rub here, is how do they get something that both sides of the aisle can agree on? Schumer and the Democrats seem to really want to be pushing social equity, and that isn't really in safe banking now. So that's why you hear this push for Schumer's CAOA bill in April. My guess is they'll figure out a happy medium, and it'll probably be safe banking plus. But this is all positive news for the cannabis industry, especially U.S. operators, because of the fact that there's such a limitation on financing that you could do, or even types of trades. I mean, there's such a limitation on just even being able to buy. So if you're on Reddits or these other forums, you see all these cannabis operators that are listed in the U.S. And if you have a Robinhood account, you can easily go on and buy those because they're listed in the U.S., but none of the U.S. MSOs are. So it's taking off those handcuffs for us to operate like a regular business. I mean, if you think about going into a Nordstrom or any other store or Walmart, you would never walk in with a wad of cash to buy product. And you need to do that in cannabis right now. So just imagine being able to go in, use a credit card, or just run typical banking for a company. It really will throw jet fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I echo Todd's sentiments here as well. If reform is going to happen this year, I tend to think it's going to be a safe plus. I think with the letter that Chuck Schumer sent out to the ranking members to try to get advice and input and guidance on this to try to build a consensus towards the CAOA Act, it's going to be hard to pass that because full legalization, I don't know if everybody's on board. Most of the analysts don't think that it's quite there yet, that has the support. But once he gets that shot, once he gets to, his bill tries to get that passed, if it doesn't pass, then it will lead an environment where if SAFE is attached to something like the HOPES Act with the expungement in cannabis and gets that social justice measures in there, maybe then we see it pass after the COA is tried sometime in April. That's what I think as well.
And keep in mind, there's votes that go up in October. So if Democrats want to hold majority, they need to have a push before then.
You wonder if they leverage that, right? I know when we had Jim on, your CEO, Jim Cacioppo, before Christmas, he felt very strongly that safe banking could pass before, not could, but he felt strong that this will pass prior to the midterms next year. What's the sentiment around the company and the people that you talk within the space, Todd? Are you feeling that same way, or has anything changed since prior to Christmas?
So, yeah, I mean, that I would say that is for the most part everybody's personal wishes and opinions, but I mean at Jushi it's business as usual.
Yeah,
nothing has changed in our mind. We still need to operate our stores. We still need to keep on expanding and building out. So if that stuff happens, great, and it's a major upside. But at the end of the day, we're living in the world that we're actually living in, and we need to do what we need to do to keep a business running. So yes, there's optimism, but at the end of the day, that's not our reality now. So we just try and focus on the today and maybe the tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? So
it blows my mind away when you think about how healthy this industry is. And like you just said prior, people are walking in with cash everywhere. Think about where this industry could go once the proper legislation gets implemented. We really have, as much as we talk about the true opportunity at hand, I don't think we realize how big this would possibly be. Don't you think, Ben?
Oh, 100%. I mean, everybody's seen all the armed robberies going on all across the nation in cannabis stores because they have cash on hand, right? And they can't put that in the bank.
I know.
A few months ago, I was actually reading a story about how someone estimated that there's $10 billion in the ground in California. Just people burying cash because they can't put it in. They don't have the banking to put it in. They don't have accounts. It's not set up for them. So there's actually caches of cash stored underground in barrels and things like that. Almost something out of Breaking Bad. when he kept it in the storage locker.
Narcos, brother.
Narcos, yeah.
Yeah. Or Narcos.
Buried that stuff all over South America, right? I think there was money that went to waste because he forgot where it was. That's
100%. Except this is not even a movie. This is actually happening.
I know.
This is real. So, I mean, the need for safe banking, I think everybody acknowledges the need for it. And that's why I think the consensus is it will pass. It's just more of a matter of when, right? Ed Perlmutter attached it to the Competes Act. Whether that has 60 votes to pass by itself is debatable. It may or may not. Whether it makes the conference process, I think, there's a good chance that Chuck Schumer is going to block it because that will kill the momentum for CAOA. So I don't think he wants that to happen first. So I think it's going to go the way of the NDAA, but we'll see. That's what some of the analysts think. But either way, once Chuck gets his shot, April, and gauges support. If it doesn't pass, I think there's a window of opportunity before the midterms where SAFE has an opportunity, or SAFE Plus with the HOPES Act or something akin to that will have an opportunity to get through. There's going to be a window there.
You got to be surprised, though, right, Todd? A year ago, we were like, yes, the Dems now control the Senate. Now we're going to have paved the way for cannabis. And here we are 13 months later. As much as it's business as usual, and a lot of companies that we have on say the same thing, and it is. You guys are doing incredible things, even, given this current circumstances that you're operating on. But is it a surprise to you 13 months later that we're still standing still and still talking about this as if Mitch McConnell's still calling the shots?
Unfortunately, no.
You're not surprised.
I'm not surprised.
Why?
I am. So a prior life, I'm an attorney by trade. I understand how long these regulations and legislation takes. Even if something were to be proposed, approved, it still takes 6 months, a year to get it implemented, to build out rules and regulations and promulgate other requirements that you would need. So, was it super exciting that things were rumored around last year? Yes. And was Jushi very advantageous of that? Yes. We capitalized on it. We did raises and at the top of the market, and we were able to pretty much build our coffers and be ready for M&A and expansion and everything else. But no, I'm personally not surprised at all. It's kind of like, and anything else where there's this super hype and excitement that goes around it, but you really need actual progress. You need things to start. So even like, for example, the SAFE bill and everything else being proposed now, it's great and it's going to be wonderful once it passes. But keep in mind, it's probably going to take another 6 months to a year to actually get things going. So you got to just live in the constructs of what you have.
Yeah, and I've had those conversations where, it will take some time to actually build its foundation and to properly take place. But this has been a boiling pot for how many years, Ben? 3-4 years amongst the retail investor community. And if and when this does pass, I think you'll see a huge explosion within the first couple of days.
Yeah, it's really big. Obviously, it allows these dispensaries to get accounts going, use the banking system, which is huge in itself. But it might also, and we've discussed it before, it might do things such as allow credit card purchases, which are widely not available right now. So you can just add 5 to 10% basket size amounts to pretty much all purchases within all states on average, if safe banking goes through and credit cards can be, are allowed in the purchasing process. So things like that, it will actually be accretive to the top lines of these companies, as opposed to just be like a symbolic things where they can use the banking system. It's actually going to add to sales. And I would argue that there's actually a social justice metric sort of built in, because a lot of these minority small dispensaries who win licenses can't really even get off the ground, right? So if they're allowed to use the banking system, isn't that a social justice measure in itself? I would argue that it is. So, we'll see, but I think it's going to happen. The momentum's there. There's enough support. I think the only thing blocking it is Chuck Schumer cannot allow this to go the conference process, in my opinion, until he tries his banking bill for a CAOA, because there's no way safe banking and legalization are happening in the same year. It just no one can convince me of that. Theoretically, it's possible. We'll see. But
the only thing blocking, if you translate it, are baby boomers. Shouldn't go that far, but you know what? At the same time, this is a generational thing. But times are changing. When you look at the crypto, Ethereum space, I can't help but feel the way it's kind of come on and taken over, the world over the past 4 or 5 months. Let's not forget what cannabis did for the overall investment community across the world 4 or 5 years ago and where this is headed. But do you not think it'll have the same kind of impact amongst the investment world, Todd, when we do reach that point, kind of like what crypto's done over the past 3-4 months?
It will be massive.
Yeah.
Just think about the liquidity. Think about just how many people are going to flood in and will have access to markets, on their Robinhoods or just their more traditional ways. If they can't get the types of approvals, you will see tons of money coming in, and institutional money, because all of the compliance restrictions or other types of measures that they need to, jump over the hurdles, they won't be there at that point. So what Jushi is actually in the process of doing is we're proactively reaching out to institutions and groups that we know are on the sidelines, but getting them up to speed as much as possible. So as soon as they get green lit, we're one of the first names in their mind and on their list. I just wanted to piggyback on something that Ben said earlier about how the banking will provide these small businesses with access to capital. A lot of these larger groups like ourselves are well connected and we can fundraise on our own. Jushi has done a very good job of that. But having a small business go to a credit union and try and take out a $5 million loan, good luck, Chuck, right? So being able to go to a bank and get a traditional small business loan will be huge for them. So they won't be winning licenses and then trying to flip them for cash. They'll actually start running businesses. So people are yelling at the MSOs or other people for consolidating, but we're just taking advantage of what's in front of us, and we're just being smart and tactical about it. And we would actually love for small businesses to have this advantage, because more businesses, more people to sell our products to and build out our wholesale model. So we are all in support of that stuff.
Yeah, you wonder why. I guess maybe Cory Booker looks at it differently, but that's anyone's guess. But we'll watch closely for sure. One of the states I wanted to bring up is Pennsylvania, one of the states that you operate in, Todd, and that senators, they want to begin discussing recreational cannabis legalization, which is great, knowing that Pennsylvania is obviously one of the most lucrative medicinal states right now. This is, however, just the first step, knowing the GOP legislature is openly discussing recreational cannabis for the first time, which is, like I said, very positive. In a nutshell, how important is this? And have you heard much, like what's the word on the street as to how you see this developing?
Sure. So Jushi actually focuses most of its lobby efforts at state levels.
Okay.
Pennsylvania is our largest footprint. We are one or two in actual stores open and operational. We're capped out at 18 right now. And we love Pennsylvania. We're actually in the process of expanding our grower processor significantly to have more flower and product online in anticipation of adult use being proposed or being, potentially pushed forward even more. So it's something that's very much on our radar. It's something that we are lobbying regularly. We are involved in those conversations. It's something we are very optimistic about.
That's exciting.
Now, question, Todd. How realistic do you think it is to, is there a realistic timeline in 2022, or would you forecast this if everything moves in the right direction to be more of a 2023, 2024 thing? And second part to that question is, do you think it's inevitable that the legislature, whoever's in power at the time, is going to act, because you have huge cities like Pennsylvania, which are sitting right on the Delaware River, and you can't have, you don't want people crossing over, spending their dollars in an adjacent state when they can just spend it at home. So kind of a two-part question there for you.
Sure. So I'm actually going to take your second part first. I am starting to hear that a lot of dispensaries are opening up on the New Jersey border. So and I'm hearing that a lot of dispensaries are opening up on other state borders that have adult use programs around Pennsylvania. It would behoove the state of Pennsylvania to enact laws that would prevent, market bleed, right? And not only that, there's tons of jobs that you can support. There's tons of cash, tax revenues that you can build out from adult use. It would be very advantageous for them to do it, and do it sooner than later, because of all the outside pressures. To touch on the point about timeline and expectation, we would love it as soon as possible, but it kind of goes to the point I was making earlier, about the federal laws. States very similar. You may vote on something and may be approved, but then there's always the enactment and, build out phase. So who knows when that is? But I think as soon as something is approved, I'd probably give it anywhere from a 6 to 18 month lead time.
Wow.
But theoretically, it could happen pretty quickly, right? Because Pennsylvania has a very developed medicinal market. It's not like it's lagging. I mean, it's been around for a while now. I'm not sure the date, and they also have quite a few dispensaries already operational, correct? So
So Pennsylvania, I was checking out the stats earlier today. I'm pretty sure there's 150 operational dispensaries within Pennsylvania. And actually, when Illinois flipped, they didn't have that many. And Illinois' market went flying as soon as adult use started. So yes, the Pennsylvania is primed and ready to actually handle that, especially with Jushi and some other competitors expanding out their GPs and preparing for scaling. So yes, I think that Pennsylvania would be ready for that flip. And be much more prepared than other states when that flip occurs.
So it's not a matter of if, it's when recreational will pass. And do you not see this happening across the country over the next, 2-3 years? You may not get federal legalization, but do you think you get a lot of these dispensaries that are opened up on state lines, and obviously politicians are using common sense, but as we start to see this model come into play, do you not see this actually, you may not ever get federal legalization, but do you not see rec and medicinal eventually being legalized across the country in individual states within the next 5 years?
I would be hopeful of that. And to be honest, even at a federal level, and this is a personal opinion, but I don't think states are going to want to give up that power to feds. Like, why would they want interstate commerce when you have companies who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into facilities that are now protected in those states? It would make sense for the states to create laws to protect the businesses within them. But yes, I mean, the types of tax generated dollars that are coming out of states like Colorado and Illinois, it seems like a no-brainer that other states should be following.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about this week's performance in the market, the industry. We saw a nice little rebound and some volume, but before we get into that, one of the other things we wanted to have you on is we've been talking about this a lot in our podcast. It's just the overall health of the industry. This is pure a politician / legislate play right now. And, people are, I think the biggest thing or the hardest thing is the waiting game. What's the feedback that you're receiving amongst your investment community, and what's the message that you're communicating them during these times?
So there was a lot of that in 2021 of what's going on. I bought in February and you guys are like 60% haircut, 70% haircut. And the message that we're saying is, Jushi is clicking on all cylinders. We are very much in growth mode. We're building out our stores.
Yep.
We're expanding our GPs, and we are getting ready for these major transitions in states like Pennsylvania and Virginia, and they will have major catalysts once those go adult use. But I mean, the only thing that we're trying to tell investors and communities is we're doing what we need to do. This is clear. This is mainly macro, nothing micro. And, especially because this is such a new industry and because there's all this gray area, when the markets, the overall markets start falling apart.
Yeah.
Cannabis is typically the first one that people are willing to get out of quickly because of all the volatility. So they're more willing to get out, but to us, that's retail investors, and that's just kind of how it is. So we're just going to keep telling our story and keep trying to lock in investors for the long term. We recently actually did a private placement where we were proactively reached out to for blocks, for a block trade. So we were able to do that. And I think that shows our investor base that some of our largest strategic investors have now believe that there is somewhat of that it's bottomed out and it's time to buy back in.
What a time to
now,
get
speaking
in.
Of getting your message out, Todd, I just want to know what kind of advantage is it to have somebody like Andreas Neumann on your team as the chief marketing officer? Because obviously this industry is all about branding, right? And I mean, you have somebody who just can head and shoulders do it above anybody else, I would imagine, right? He's so credentialed. So what's it like to have Andres Neumann, and what has he done since he's arrived to the team?
For sure, and thanks for bringing that up. So we actually have these amazing, we pretty much have an in-house brand team, which is very unique. Most of these companies need to go out and buy brands or figure out ways to license and partner with brands. We've actually been able to develop a lot of our own brands in-house. And when we initially started our company, we're, hedge fund guys, Wall Street guys, we focused on buying or bringing on the Clinic, which is a group originally out of Colorado. They have all the IP. They are like some of the original live resin creators using PAX pods and things like that. So we brought them in and we leveraged their expertise and experience, and then also brought in Dre, this amazing creative mind, married them together with our IR team, which is also really great. And we help with all this brainstorming. We've been able to launch some amazing brands like The Bank is one of our high-end flower brands, the Shea, our value brand, like Fine Grind and Shake. We have The Lab, which is cartridges, vapes, concentrates, Tasteology, which is our brand new edibles brand. It's really great. We do tarts and gummies and, you know, all that type of stuff. But on top of
the end of the week, where is this? We should be having this now.
Yeah. Well, let's go out to Nevada. We can try it all out. So, but on top of all of this regular products brands, Jushi has been very focused on branding Jushi in our stores. You know, Beyond Hello is our retail brand store. Nature's Remedy is also one of them. And it's all about customer experience. But on top of all that, we then are also super innovative in the fact we just actually launched what we're calling a Jushi TV. It's an investor series. We just had Jim do the introduction, give a general overview of the company. And then within a week or so, we're going to introduce the head of our retail, Brendan, he's actually came from Anthropology and helped build out that whole store. And he'll be doing an introduction, breaking down stores. And then we'll have our COO talk about our GPs and break it down. So we do that. We also do monthly newsletters, and we try and stay very engaged and as transparent as possible with our investors so they feel that comfort. And we aren't getting those, well, what's going on? Why aren't you guys telling us?
Yeah.
You know?
Branding and distribution, very, very important. And I know it gets overlooked so much in this industry, but those are the pure early signs of a successful company, but obviously a huge advantage. For those that don't know who Dre is, he's won an Emmy. He's run one of the biggest, you know, marketing agencies at one time in the U.S., has worked with the likes of, I know, Apple and some big brands. So he's definitely got the skill set. Before I let you go, I do want to talk a little bit about the market this week. We saw a big move with MSOs and component stocks this week, rising above 24% trough to peak and 28% off the bottom overall. And also volume really picked up this week. So Ben, why the jump this week?
Well, I think it's just mainly optimism about safe banking. A lot of good press headlines lately. Of course, Ed Perlmutter adding the safe banking amendment to competes, and that was accepted by the House. So now it's going to conference. So most of this, I think, is optimism. It's very similar to what we saw in early November, where safe banking was attached to the NDAA, and people thought maybe that was the time as well. And the market spiked, it went up about a similar amount before obviously coming back. So I think we're seeing the same dynamics here. Start of the year, MSOs, ETF is starting to get a lot of inflows. They've had a couple big ones, I think, just this week. So they're obviously a good put on the market. You know, they're buying 100,000 to 200,000 share blocks of all these component companies. Obviously, that's helping out. And just optimism. And of course, we saw Schumer come out with the letter. So he's trying to get a consensus by bringing it to committee, bring it to ranking members to try to get the language set so that it has its best opportunity to pass when he introduces it in April, right? So a lot of good headlines in the sector right now. I think that's the main driver of the market. Whether it actually happens, we'll see. We already discussed Safe Plus, I think, is probably the best bet right now, but a lot of good headlines anyway, probably for the next couple months.
It's good. All right, gents. Todd, I appreciate you checking in this week. Very informative, to say the least, but it's nice to obviously get some people on just to talk about the podcast, the industry news, and just like what you're seeing and hearing right now. But I hate saying this. I know it's the waiting game, and I know investors want to say that, but you got to be transparent these times to obviously lock in. As much as there's volatility in the economy right now, I can't think of a more lucrative industry than what cannabis is. So you might have short-term pain, but long-term, as we've said all along from day one, it's just such a huge lucrative opportunity for investors.
Yeah, I'd be without putting too much optimism in it. I think as soon as we uplist,
I know,
sky's the limit.
I know. 30 to 40 million.
Todd, before you leave, let me ask you when Jushi is going to be on a Super Bowl commercial. I know they're trying to. It's not happening this year for anybody, but when is that going to happen? When do you see that happening? Cannabis of an actual company, MSO in a Super Bowl.
Over under time now, Todd. Over under, and I hope Dre listens and watches this part of it. We think in 2025?
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, right? As soon as cannabis companies are allowed to advertise in big commercials, Jushi will probably make a push for it.
Yeah, I bet. Oh, speaking of the Super Bowl, Ben, you've got your orange on. You going with Mr. Joe this weekend? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I got my orange. That was actually a coincidence. We were talking offline about that. For me, it's going to be a prop Super Bowl. The line is a little bit too close. I don't really have a good read either way, so I'm staying away from the line. I'm taking some props on a couple players. But gun to head, I'm thinking the Bengals will cover the +4. I think it's going to be on the closer side if I had to guess.
Todd, who you got?
So I want the Bengals because I think if Burrow wins, what would he be? The first Heisman, college, MVP, Super Bowl champion ever, which I think is really cool. But I mean, that D line, I just don't think that the Bengals are going to be able to keep up with that. But we'll see. I mean, Stafford likes throwing picks, but he also likes throwing touchdowns. So who knows?
Is that Bengal orange or is that Miami Hurricane orange?
Oh, let's go Canes.
Right. There you go. I'm placing a $500 bet after this podcast right now, and I'm putting on it the under. The national anthem is going to be sung in less than 1 minute and 38 seconds. You heard it here first. That's the
how do you research that? How do you research that, Shad? You can't research that. Did you go back on the tape for the last 20 years?
It's on FanDuel. It's on. Hey, look, if Bodog wants to sponsor us as well in this podcast, we're giving shouts out to them. But we're going under 1 minute and 38 for the national anthem. And my other one, Rams will cover. I bought a point. They'll cover the 2.5 spread and be Super Bowl champs. That's my pick. Picks, I should say. Regardless,
you know what? And I would love to see Akers too win the Super Bowl MVP. Imagine that ruptured tendon at the start of training camp. He came back within 6 months, which almost never happens. It's a 12-month minimum injury usually. Some people never come back the same. If he wins Super Bowl MVP, this would be outstanding. So I don't know. It's like a 33-1 odds on DraftKings or whatnot. I'd love to see it. Probably won't happen, but that would be amazing.
11 seasons with the Lions. Does that not feel like an 11-year Achilles injury for Matt Stafford? Come on, man. Like, seriously.
Good point.
Good point. Give the boy his due, right? But anyways, listen, Todd, I appreciate you taking the time this week. And Ben, as usual, both of you have a great week. Enjoy the weekend, and should be a big game on Sunday night.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
All right,
looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Chad.